Hello everybody, I'm Sandra from le blog Pour investir et s'enrichir. I have the honor today of welcoming and interviewing Lynn Frair. Lynn Frair is a nurse. She just retired 6 months ago at the age of 40 years old. So I think that's incredible, and I want to do on the same. So I thought it was good to interview her. So I think she can inspire a lot of us. We met a few weeks ago at the after movie Playing with Fire. So thank you, Lynn, for letting me interviewing you, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sandra. I'm very excited to be here and to reconnect with you. It was fun to meet you at the movie showing, and I'm looking forward to talking a little bit more about our journey and just hoping to inspire other people to look at life perhaps in a different way. It's very fun for me. Yeah. My name, as Sandra said, is Lynn Frair, and I began investing when I was about 12 years old. I went to a woman in business conference, and I asked older women if they were my age, what would they do? And they recommended starting in the stock market, starting investing young, because I had age on my side. And so I actually did that. I went down to the bank, and they told me to go home and get a parent because I was underage. And so I started from there, and honestly, with my babysitting money, and I didn't talk about it a whole lot. Then as I got older, I went about my life. I became a nurse and just continued investing. And unfortunately, and I met a lovely, lovely husband. His name is Carl. And unfortunately, I was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And here in the U.S., medical costs are a big factor for a lot of us. And so that wiped out all my years of savings. And then, so I had to rebuild from that. That started at 27 through 29. I had a net worth of zero. I essentially had nothing again. So had to rebuild from that again, but taking my investing knowledge and applying it. Then got to the point of financial independence in my 30s. And at that point, decided to release my job. I wanted to spend more time with my family. I wanted to travel, and we have two little girls. They're 4 and 5, and life is so short. So I wanted to take advantage of having some time freedom.
So let's start from the beginning. You started to invest at 12, but how did you hear about that?
I knew at a very young age that if I listened to those who were older than me, that I would have a lot of time on my side. And so I wanted to listen to those who were wiser. So I remember they told me, invest in the stock market. I wrote it down. Buy property young. I wrote that down. And I literally took that advice and I went to the bank. And so that's what started part of it. And then also I remember reading about compound interest, the power of compound interest. And Einstein used to talk about, there's a quote about that Einstein made about the power of compound interest, that it's, a wonder of the world. It's sort of a joking way, but I don't know if that's common in French, if you guys have ever heard of Einstein saying about compound interest and how powerful it is. So I remember thinking that I have this time. The power of compound interest is very, very strong. If I start now, it'll be very effective. And I tried to convince my other friends who were young also to invest their babysitting money, and nobody seemed to do that.
You really started young investing, looking for compound interest. Why didn't you choose like a finance career? And why did you want to be a nurse?
I think that's a really good question, and I ask myself that a lot too. I have many interests, actually. So I'm very curious about everything. And I read a lot about a lot of different things. I'm getting a lot of attention for my investing because that caused something that's very, very notable. But I also am interested in healthcare and medicine and helping people and the environment, so I think that by doing nursing and pursuing healthcare, that's another passion of mine that I really enjoy. And I also did the financial stuff on the side for fun. But I have found that it's best for me to work on several different things that I really enjoy rather than just one thing. And I do kind of wonder if I entered the finance industry, maybe would it not be as fun for me? I'm not sure. After I left my career I'm calling it a pause, because what I'm learning is I don't really know what will happen in the next many, many decades of my life. But for what I know for now is that I am not in nursing. And what I have sort of learned is that it's really good to balance a lot of different interests. And there's different ways to help people. And that can be in medicine and that can be in finance. But I considered becoming a financial advisor. But the way that I really want to help people is sort of coaching in their behaviors. And financial advisors don't tend to do that from all the research that I've done. So mine is more behavior focused, because I think the approach to finance is about 20% knowledge and about 80% behaviors. And so I study behavioral finance for fun. I just really enjoy it. So I learn about how do people react when the market goes down, and what mistakes do they make, and how do they act emotionally, and why. And if you can get a hold of that in your investing, you are miles ahead of many, many people. So that is my interest. And because I have freedom to choose, I get to choose exactly what I like.
Yeah.
So people ask me, will you start a blog? And I don't like writing, so I don't want to. I don't mind speaking or being interviewed. So when people invite me to do that, I think it's quite fun. So I say yes. But I don't enjoy writing, so I get to say no. And I wish everybody had that freedom, honestly. Can we talk about, like, the French, like, the view about money, and can we do that?
Yeah, sure, of course.
Yeah, I want to know, because I think it's really, really important to talk about these difficult things. Money is a hard topic to talk about, and to kind of get at the perspective, because I'll be honest that I don't know much about the culture as far as money. I respect the French culture and French Canadian, but I don't know that much, and I'd love to learn from your perspective.
Yeah, sure. So in France, it's like money, you don't talk about it. You don't talk about it with your friends. So you don't talk about it in school, nor with your parents. It's I don't know if you can say that, money is taboo. But it's also related to success. So now I said, like 1 year ago, I was like, now I want to live the life of my dreams. I want to accomplish something, so I'm gonna start getting like passive incomes. And people just look at me, what is she talking about? You need to work hard. You need to have like a career in finance. You had a good career in finance. Why did you stop that? So it's really difficult for people to have this mindset and freedom.
I would say there's actually a lot of similarities in what you said about French culture and what I see in traditional American culture, where it's a pretty uncomfortable subject to talk about money in a lot of contexts. However, it's very common on social media to show people what you bought. So when people buy a new car or they buy a new outfit, they show that. So in some ways, they're showing money and purchases. So I would say in American culture, it's very common to sort of brag about the things that we buy. And the problem is that most people cannot even handle a small emergency. So they're showing that they're buying all these things, presumably to impress other people, yet they are financially not very secure. So I would say that it's also uncomfortable to talk about money. I'm more comfortable talking about it because I'm very passionate about making it not taboo. But the general population is fairly uncomfortable.
Yeah. So now you're a financial coach. So what's the main difficulty like you see with your clients when you first see them? Is it like the same? I don't want to talk about money, but I know I've got some issues. I have debts. What is the main difficulty?
Yeah, well, so what's so cool is I get to pick what I do. So my favorite client to work with is, so I work particularly with nurses, and I love working with people who want to do some sort of life transformation. So most of us have within themselves like some dream business they want to start, or some, for nurses, it's a certain, they want to go into a certain field within nursing, but they're too afraid to make the leap. And usually the two barriers to making a life change like that is fear and money. And so if I can help them solve those problems, then we can have this transformation toward this life that they love. And so that's who my clients tend to be, because that's, I love doing it. And I also think that's what's attracted to me, because I'm clear about that's my ideal client. So it's very, very, very fun. And so as far as the challenge that I see, like, is fear, usually fear. And then how do we create a gap between what they earn and what they spend, so that you have a little bit of a runway so that you can make a life change? And for some people, it's really small. It's not a big change. And then for some people, it's really big. So some of the clients we've worked with, they've been able to retire earlier than they thought, so they could pursue something else, maybe starting a nonprofit. Some people are switching careers. Some people are going back to school, but they have inside them some sort of passion, and they are afraid to make the decision, or they're afraid to take that jump. And so I work with them on that. And because I have a background in helping people with transitions and helping people and working with money, that is the perfect setup to do this. So I love it, and it's so fun.
You had a brain tumor, which is pretty serious because you had surgery. Was it like your wake-up call?
I think that I've always tried to be pretty intentional with how I live life. But having a brain tumor, there was a point in time I didn't know if I would survive. So that was very scary, because at one point I thought that the tumor had spread to my spine, which does not have a good outcome. And they told me, you will have to learn how to walk again. You might have to have a feeding tube. You may not be able to speak. So it was a very, very scary time. And I think anybody who goes through something like that, it's very awakening in a way. Luckily for me, I did have to learn how to walk again, but not because my muscles were weak. It was because the tumor was on my balance nerve. So I had to learn how to walk again, because whenever I walked, it was the feeling like I was on a rocky ship all the time. So it was very, very hard to walk. And I did learn how to walk again. It took me several weeks. And then even now, I'm not very well balanced as far as walking, but I haven't let that stop me, really. I've since run a marathon, but I have to think more about balancing than most people. But I do think that was a wake-up call for me to realize that life is so precious. Our time is very, very precious. And since I had really lost everything that I had worked hard for, I didn't know if that would happen again. So I was very fond of not having any debt. So I would just, if I try not to accumulate any debt, and then if I did have any debt, I would try to pay it down very quickly. My husband, when I met him, he was not into finance at all, but luckily he trusted me, and he kind of went along the journey with me of avoiding debt and investing. And so that's really important, is to have a partner who's at least compatible with the idea. He really doesn't do any investing at all, but he does trust me. and he's starting to learn, a lot about interest rates and such. It's very cute. He's doing really well. His credit score was pretty low when I met him, and now it's very, very high. And in the U.S., I don't know if this is the same in France, but in the U.S., credit scores are very important for when you take out a loan for a home or for a car. It can really affect how much a house costs because of that interest rate. So, it was, to answer your question, it was very awakening. And then, so when I think about the things that probably impacted how I view my time, it's having the brain tumor. And then, at the time I was diagnosed with the brain tumor, I was an ICU nurse, which is intensive care. So the sick people. And I went back there for a while. But then I moved into home care and then eventually hospice care, which is comfort care at the end of life, so that people have a good quality of life. And I saw so many people dying, and it becomes very, very clear about what's important and what's not important. So I saw very clearly relationships are important. Kindness is important. Travel is a lot of fun. People don't regret the time they spent traveling, but the stuff, that ends up not being a big deal. That ends up not bringing people lasting joy. And so it made it a lot easier for me to save and to invest and to prioritize time freedom. One of the things that I study is happiness. And when they do studies about happiness, when you buy a new thing, let's say you buy a new car, it makes you happy for at the most about 6 months, at the very most. And then you're back to your baseline happiness. So there is nothing that we can really buy. I mean, our homes are full of things that we thought at one point would make us happier, right? We look around and they're full of things that we thought would make us happier, yet usually we're not much happier. So once you become clear on what actually makes you happy, and for a lot of people, the science shows that it's people, it's relationships, it's community around you, it is helping others, it is learning, it's sharing information, but rarely is it actually things. And once you get a little bit more clear on that, then it becomes easier to both live in the present and also plan for the future, because you sort of disentangle this idea of these things you think you might need to have in order to be happy, because most of us have a lot of what we truly need already, and anything else beyond that won't make us tremendously happier. We think it will, but the science doesn't support that. And one of the things that I talk to with my clients is, how when you're in college, you're really poor, like a poor college student often. In the U.S., at least, that's the case. In France, it's that because you have no income, really. And so you're this poor college student. So if you look at your life now and you look at when you were a poor college student, how much happier are you than when you were in college? And for most people, college was a happy time for them, yet they had very little. And so you have to go, so has having all these things made me much happier? And in some cases, a little bit, but in most cases, not tremendously. And there's some beauty and some simplicity. Like when you go to a hotel and there's just sort of a bed and just a few things, people, when they study happiness, they find that people are happier and relaxed when there's not a lot of clutter in their life. And so if we're buying these things to make us happier and they're not making us happier, then it's not very helpful. But we keep doing it because we think it will.
Is to find what makes you happy, so then you can focus and think about how to be happy and still plan for tomorrow.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And most people, when I talk to them, when I work with them, what they want is time freedom. They want flexibility in their life. They want more time with their family. They want more time to exercise. That's very popular in the U.S. They want to sleep more, and take better care of their health. It's very consistent, actually, with most people. They want those types of things. And a lot of people want to do something that provides some good value to the world. And so if we can create this time freedom for ourselves, then we can really cultivate a life where we're happier, where we have more time freedom. And then at some point we can start to figure out how can we help more than just our community? How can we be helpful out there and use our talents for the greater good? And that really is a gift. And I'd love for more people to be able to have that. So that's why I do this.
Yeah. Wow, it's amazing. I wish I could do the same and inspire people thinking about time freedom, not money as a goal, but about what they really want when they have money, and then money will help them. So
that's how I think about it. I actually, money is the tool.
Exactly.
We live in a society with money, and that's the tool, but really the currency is time. And, that reminds me of my favorite book, one of my favorite books. It's funny, I did not plan this, but I actually have it right here. So have you ever seen this, Your Money or Your Life
I ordered
book?
it at the library, still waiting for it for 1 month now.
Oh,
A lot of people want to read it.
Look, mine was signed by the author. I'm so excited.
Wow,
I'm a big fan of Vicki. I don't know if you can see this, but anyway, the book is Your Money or Your Life by Vicki Robin, and it really talks about, let's say you buy a new sweater, and the sweater costs $50, and if you make $50 an hour, you're trading an hour of your life for that sweater. But the problem is then there's taxes, and then there's this and that, and the cost to commute to a job, and so you actually earn less than $50 an hour, because once you take out all the other costs associated with working. So it really helps quantify when you buy something, you're exchanging your time for that thing. And so do you really want to trade off your time freedom for that thing? And sometimes the answer is yes. So for me, I have these ridiculous boots that I love. They're gorgeous and they're very expensive. But I thought I do want to trade my money for these boots. They are a quality of life thing for me. And my husband drinks, Starbucks is very popular here in Seattle. We all drink coffee. Not all of us, but many of us drink coffee all day. Lots of coffee. Well, he has a favorite drink that he drinks every day. And that's so important to him, though. So you shouldn't give up the things that really bring you joy, because then you'll feel deprived and sad. But you should question, do these things bring me joy? Because some of them will, but many of them won't. And so it's a matter of questioning what is important to you, not what is important to other people, not how can I look so great on social media so that other people think I'm so rich, but what's really important to you.
Yeah, wow, great advice.
Yeah. That's a really good book because it's about money, but it's about life, and it's very inspiring. It's one of the first books that I read that really solidified the concept for me about money and time and how that interchanges.
Okay, good, great. And back to French culture. Usually here, when we talk about finance, or when I look at on Facebook groups and everything, I would like to invest money, but I don't have any skills. I don't understand anything, so I cannot do it. It's like finance is for high level, like directors of companies, not for like me, for you. So they think they cannot do it because they can pay for an expert, finance coach. So they won't do anything. How would you suggest or recommend people to let them know that they can learn to? It's not like a secret cult or something like that.
Yes, and you really don't need somebody to do it for you. But yeah, so to get started, first of all, I think sometimes the biggest barrier is people, if they don't do it perfectly, they won't start at all.
Oh.
If they don't know exactly what to do, they won't do anything. And so then they don't do anything. But you just start somewhere. You start and you buy something small, and then you learn from that. On my website, because people kept asking me, like, how do I learn? Where can I learn?
Yeah.
Where do I find this information? So on my website, I put free resources section, and it has a link to all my favorite, everything is absolutely free. And it's got my favorite podcasts, my favorite books, where people can get started. Absolutely free. There's not even affiliate links. But there's some, I don't know too much about French investing and what's available.
Mm-hmm.
And the FIRE movement now is, a lot of it is American, is my take, but there's becoming more and more in other countries. And so what I would recommend is people look perhaps online for other groups of people who are learning about investing and who are in their country, because there are going to be tax specific things for that country. There are going to be various benefits. So like perhaps in France or in Canada, you guys don't have access to the same types of investment tools. However, you do have access to healthcare,
Yeah.
So you have some pros, and you have, the U.S. does have access to healthcare, but it's completely different. And so there's pros and cons for each country, and the best way to find out what that is to connect with other citizens of that same country who have similar mindsets and learn from each other. So without necessarily going to an advisor, just starting with other people and learning from them and doing research, and then just keep growing from there. You don't have to do it perfectly, but starting is important.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I sometimes have trouble because sometimes I like things to be perfect, and so then I won't take action. But there is so much benefit in taking imperfect action. So my family is here. Some of my family is from Norway, and they're here and staying with us right now. And we were talking about investing, and they're teenagers. So I thought, this is so cool because they're so interested. And I said, you guys have time on your side.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the beautiful thing. If you start investing now and you just invest for 10 years and stop, say, you will generate more money than somebody who starts 10 years later and contributes 3 times the amount. So they have to contribute, anybody who starts 10 years after somebody else, you have to contribute 3 times the amount in order to catch up with them. So that's why the strong benefit of starting, even if it's a little bit, you don't want to be reckless. You can start small, but just at least trying to learn and trying to grow. It's very, very powerful.
Yeah.
And learn from other people who are doing the same.
Yeah, exactly. So who are your mentors, by the way? Vicky Robin?
I would say Vicky. Yeah, I was able to Skype talk to her in April, and that was extremely exciting for me because I had already left work, so I talked about the transition, and, it's a big change. And we have 2 little kids, and we're working on our house, so we were not bored at all, but it's a big transition. And I get a lot of questions, and some people are very supportive, and some people are, there's a lack of understanding about what we're doing, and so that can be really hard. But I was talking with her about the transition, and she was immensely helpful, but she is really a mentor. There is a woman in my family, and she probably doesn't even know she's a mentor, but she is, and she does real estate investing, and I've always looked up to her. And I've had so many people along the way. There's also another woman who I know, and I won't mention her by name because she's pretty shy, but she's about 10 years older than I am, and she retired in her 40s, and I really admire her. So it's particularly powerful for me to connect with other females because in the U.S., I don't know if this is the same as France, but in the U.S., females tend to earn about 86% of what a male earns.
Yeah, same in France.
Is it the same?
Yeah.
So that 14% difference is hugely significant. So for somebody who starts young, that can be millions of dollars potentially. So we, on average, as women, are working against a disadvantage. And so if we're able to, in spite of that disadvantage, still be able to create a life of increased freedom, it's very empowering. And I'd like to be able to help I think that's also why I like to work with nurses, nurses are primarily female, and to empower them. There's a lot of data to show that women can be better investors than men. I mean, no offense, but women tend to invest more cautiously and not do a lot of trading. And trading can be a little bit more dangerous and doesn't have as good of outcomes on average. So there's a lot of potential for women to become better investors, which I think is really cool.
And you talk about the FIRE movement, so financially independent, retire early. I discovered this movement only maybe 2-3 months ago.
Yeah.
But I'm on my way. I'm on my path to financial independence for a year now.
Yeah.
And it was difficult for me to find support. How did your family react when they said, I'm retiring now at 40?
Well, I didn't really talk about it until I did it. And I shocked everybody, I think. And then people became curious, and some people were very skeptical. And I think after I left work, I found a lot of people who were in the FIRE movement going, oh my gosh, Lynn, you already did this. How can we learn from you? So I feel a lot of support from people who want to learn from me. And then as I go further along, and I think people keep expecting that I'm going to go back to work, and I don't, then they go, oh, maybe they are really doing this. There's a lot of criticism in the FIRE movement because many people in the FIRE movement have some sort of side gig that they do, some sort of job. In fact, I know hundreds of people in the FIRE movement, and I would say 99% of people earn some sort of income doing something, dog sitting or coaching other people or tango lessons or teaching yoga. And so the criticism is that, well, then you're not really retired, right? Mm-hmm. What's very interesting is if you're 67 in the U.S., that's a fairly common retirement age, 65, 67. Mm-hmm. So if you're 67 and you've had your whole career, and then you retire from your job, and then you teach tango lessons on the side, people don't say, well, now you're not retired because you're teaching tango lessons. But when you do that when you're in your 30s or 40s, that is what people say. And so, the retirement now is different than it was, because if many people's definition of retirement is basically sitting on a beach, sipping drinks. So if you do anything other than that, then some people call it not retirement. And I actually wondered it myself. Why does everybody seem to start a small business after they retired? So, and I was not going to do that. I did not want to start a small business. I wanted to just retire, be with my family. And it evolved into that. And so I don't like writing, but I wrote one blog article, and it was about this. It was called, and I even hid it, but if you search, it was called How I Was arrested by the early retirement police. There's no real thing as the early retirement police, but a lot of people are judgmental about it, and so we call them the early retirement police that says you are earning a small amount of income, so therefore you cannot call yourself retired at all. So even if you earn $5, it doesn't count. So I wrote an article about why people, when they retire, transition into some sort of paid work, is because people who retire are very hardworking. They tend to be very bright, resourceful, creative, and people go, wow, you have all these talents and you have this free time. There are also many things that we love to do. So, like for me, my coaching, I was giving it away for free. I did it for free for a lot of people. And then I realized that the follow-up was not as great. And I studied about this. It was because they didn't have as much skin in the game. And so when I charge people, their outcomes are better because they're more invested.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So although I didn't expect to be doing that, that's the model that it went to. So I kind of wrote an article about the evolution of how I began charging for my time, because my time is immensely valuable. So if I spend time coaching, then I'm not out gardening. Yeah. So now maybe I want to pay a gardener, or maybe I have less time with my children. So every time I spend time with a client, then I'm trading off something else. So anyway, it's all about balance, and I have really kind of strict schedule hours, and sometimes I have a wait list because I only want to work so much, and it works out really, really well. But yes, that's the big criticism, is that a lot of people end up doing something. Many things that we do are not paid. But if there's even one thing that you do that gets even one little bit of income, then there's criticism about that.
Mm-hmm. And how do the parents of your friends of your child react? Do your child hear about anything like your parents don't work, they are rich, or something like that?
That's a really good question. So my girls are 4 and 5, and I did wonder how they would react. So after many months, my oldest daughter, the 5-year-old, she said, "Mom, when are you going back to work?" And I said, why are you worried about, or what are you wondering about? And she goes, "Well, I just wish you would go back to work." And I thought, oh no, that's what's wrong. And it turns out at my work, they have a snack machine where they have treats in the snack machine. So she missed going to visit the snack machine to get treats. So that's why she wanted me to go back to work, is just so that she could get snacks. So what we've noticed too, and this is another reason why the coaching is good, we want to model behavior that hard work is important, even if we don't have a traditional and customary job. So that's another reason why me coaching people is good for modeling behavior. It's good for them to have time away from me, and it's good for me to have a little bit of time away from them. What I love is that I have the discretion to choose how much that is. Yeah. So what I don't want is for them to grow up entitled. And what I don't feel, we live what this area would consider a modest income, because if we spent lots and lots and lots of money, we would not be financially independent. Mm-hmm. We would spend all our money too quickly. And so we live a fairly modest life. It's a nice life, we think, but it's not extravagant. So we hope that she sees that. She sees us sharing with our neighbors. We always share things. We often borrow things because we have a strong community. And we hope that she sees that we work hard physically. We just did a big repair on our house, and my husband and I did the repair ourselves. Mm-hmm. So we're always aware of that, and we don't want them to feel like life is too easy for them. We want them to value hard work and friends and community. But honestly, it's a bit of an experiment to see, how does this go? but I love having the time freedom to figure that out. Have you ever heard the book Choose Your Own Adventure?
Oh, no.
There's
No.
There's a book, like years ago. I think they have a show now, but life is just kind of, you get to choose your own adventure in life. And so I feel like we get to choose even more adventures. Like if I were working, I would not have the time to talk with you today. Or they just asked me to come speak in Cincinnati, Ohio at a conference in March. I would not have time to do that. And I think that's such a beautiful gift, to be able to do things like that. Well, I really appreciate what you told me about how folks look at money. What I've noticed and appreciated about, from what I've seen, and correct me if I'm wrong, what I appreciate about French culture with their clothing is they seem to buy fewer pieces but higher quality, more versatile items. Would you say that's true? Where in the U.S., it's very common to to have maybe hundreds and hundreds of pieces of clothing, but not necessarily very well made. I think people on average wear them maybe 5 times before they throw them out. Clothing waste is a really big issue in the U.S., but from what I've observed of the French, it's fewer items and higher quality, and I really appreciate that. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, it's not for everyone, but I think more and more people are getting involved into more eco-friendly things. It's either clothes or furnishing stuff, and they're asking about companies about where they made the stuff, because they know that if it's cheap, it's gonna be like children from India doing this. So they're maybe they're like might more aware about that, but still, when you're on a daily basis, it's still difficult to say, oh, okay, no, I don't want to spend €2. I will spend €100 because it's made in France. Because the gap is really, really too much between something which is €2 and €100 because it's made in France. So they try to do it that way, but it's still difficult because of the money.
I think a lot about that with buying decisions. How much are we willing to spend extra in order to do the thing that we really want to do?
Mm-hmm.
Like in the U.S., we look at organic food and inorganic food, and there's sometimes a very big cost difference to be able to buy organic food. And so then you think, gosh, do I want to spend sometimes 3 or 4 times as much? Sometimes it's not that much, but sometimes it's multiple times as much for organic food, or for clothing that's made locally or from sustainable fibers. Or it's a hard decision. But yeah, there's a lot of things that I appreciate about French culture. So it would be fun to stay connected with you so that I can learn more, because I think the U.S. honestly has a lot we could also learn as far as culture and decreased consumption. And some people have asked me, do you think the FIRE movement is going to cause really big problems with the economy if people start buying less stuff? And I think we are so far away from that being a problem, because we have multi-billion-dollar industries who encourage us to buy more and more and more. So we're would be working against this huge consumer movement. So I see it not being an issue for a very, very, very long time, but probably never. But in the meantime, we could affect many, many people, thousands of people's lives, which could be better, and also help the environment along the way, and help happiness, and help maybe prosperity for innovation. So that's why I'm...
So what would be your advice for a young guy or girl maybe going to study, because in France, usually when you go to university, you have to leave your parents' house. You become like independent, but you're all by yourself. One day you're with your parents, the day after you move out, you're by yourself. What would you suggest them so they won't jump into this overconsumption of materials, of goods that you don't need, especially when you don't have money? What would you recommend them to do?
Have you heard the term hedonic adaptation? It's kind of a big term.
Yeah, no.
So, or hedonic treadmill is another word they use. So basically, hedonism is consumption. It's and so when we get used to using a certain amount of whatever, we get used to a very fancy car, then for us, we get used to that. And so anything less than that becomes difficult for us. But if we can pause or slow down what we call lifestyle inflation, which means you have more and more things that you're using or you're consuming and you're expecting. If people go out on their own and they keep as simple of a life as possible for as long as possible, just a slight delay, that is very powerful. Because if you start getting used to expecting a lot of things and buying a lot of things very early on, it's very hard to go the other way. Mm-hmm. But if you can avoid or delay getting used to and expecting those things, it is very powerful in terms of being able to save. And it's also very powerful in terms of happiness, I found. So then when you do get to ride in the nice luxury car, you actually appreciate it rather than expecting it. When you are used to it every day, then there's very little joy and pleasure in it because you just become used to expecting it. So I would say try to live as simply for as long as you can and resist the temptation to get fancier and fancier, especially when you're young. Because if you develop bills that recur and they're very expensive, then that messes with your time freedom. That's what I always think about. Some people have said, Lynn, is it really hard to give up, things? And I look at our life and I feel like it is so beautiful and full. And we live, you can't see it here, but we live on a golf course. We live in a beautiful area. We have 2 cars, but they're not really new. They're a Lexus and a Toyota, but they're older. Our house, we fixed a little bit ourselves. It's a really nice life, but it's not as expensive as it could have been if we wanted to work more, or if we wanted to work a traditional job longer. We could have taken more elaborate vacations or something. We still take about 6 vacations a year, so it's enough for us, but it's not, extremely elaborate ones, but they are nice and they're full of joy and they're to beautiful locations, but they're more intentional, because if we do things that are too terribly expensive, then it messes with our future time freedom. Yeah. And I don't want to do that.
It reminds me, one of my roommates, he asked, what do you do for fun? Because usually we are at home, because I work from home, and so far he doesn't have a job. And so we're in the garden, and then we go to the beach at the end of the day. And so I was like, what do you do for fun? Well, this is fun. We are going to the beach like every day for picnic. If you go back to Paris, no beach, no nothing. You have to be like in a 50 degrees Celsius apartment. It's too hot. Now we really like our lives. And we don't spend much because we don't go to bars or to parties. We only parties at home or other friends' home with barbecue and everything. But his conception was like, those guys cannot have fun because they are never doing something like partying. But it's totally different. And we travel, we did a road trip, so we slept into the minivan. The thing, but it's not fun. Yes, for us it's fun. It's like we really appreciate it. So yeah, it's different conception, but he couldn't really understand what we meant. So it's kind of frustrating.
Yeah. I think that for everybody, their version of fun is different. And my husband and I, we go out. He's a chef, or he was a chef. And, well, you could say he still is, but he doesn't, have a traditional job as a chef anymore. But we love to try different foods, and we love to go to new restaurants, and we like to go with friends. But we also have 2 small kids, and so we have to arrange babysitting, and, so we go out, but maybe not as much as other people. But when we do, we really enjoy it. And so we're just intentional about it. We pick where we're going to go, and we really savor it. And but we also find a lot of joy in like going to the park and going to the beach and the simpler things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Yeah,
it's quite nice.
That reminds me of a question. After your brain tumor, you had surgery, so you kind of lose all your investment. How did you start again, and now being financially independent? How did you do it?
The biggest thing was that so I was diagnosed when I was 27, and the bills and everything came in over the next year, I would say, from that, and wiped everything out. So by the time I was 29, still by about 29, we really had a net worth of nothing. And then by the time I was 37, work was becoming more and more optional, so I moved from full-time to part-time. So that alone was very unusual for this area, which is very expensive to live. So I was working where I had 30 weeks off a year. So I only worked 22 weeks out of the year. And my husband didn't work. So that's very unusual here. Yeah. So that's when some of the questions started. And then, but by the time I was 39, 2 years later, I released work. I gave them a very long notice, though. I gave them close to 6 months. So by the time I actually left, I was 40. Yeah. But the way that I did it is through, and what most of the FIRE community actually does, is we tend to be a big fan of what's called index funds, which is a collection of stocks that is a sampling of the entire market. And for us, it's the U.S. market. And a lot of the funds will have a total stock market index, which means it'll have about 3,600 different stocks in this index fund. So you buy a fund and you get little snippets of 3,600 companies. And the great thing about that is if one of them really goes down, it doesn't bring the whole thing down. But they are stocks, so there is fluctuation that happens with stocks. But in the last many years, whereas it may have taken me, say, 14 years to become financially independent, because the market has done so well, it took us about 9 years. It's still possible quickly, but that did accelerate it for us. So I would say, I think the natural inclination could be, well, she timed the market, well, that sped it up for us, certainly, and I'll acknowledge that. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. It may take a little bit longer than if you timed the market perfectly, but we really can never time the market. We never really know what will happen with the market. So basically, I'm a fan of index funds because they have low expenses. Many of them do. You should look to see what the expense ratio is to see how expensive the fund is. On my website, on nursenumbers.com, I have the free resources section. In there, there's another book that I recommend by J.L. Collins. He is another person that I really admire. So he has a free series about what to buy. Basically, it's what to invest in and why. And if I wrote a book, it would probably be exactly like that. So if you look, you'll see on my website, nursenumbers.com, and then free resources. There's something by J.L. Collins, and it's called a stock series. So that'll walk people through what stocks to kind of look for. And in France, though, you would have to see how does that relate.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I would bet there's people in France who are part of the FIRE movement who have their opinion about that.
Yeah, okay. I have to dig up because, like I said, like back in France, money is really taboo. So even the one who are like financially independent, they don't really talk much about it. So.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's why you're working to change that, right?
I hope so, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's really great because me combining nurses and finance is very taboo. Because nurses are all about helping other people, and finance can feel like a selfish topic, I think, for some people. And so I'm combining things that don't normally exist. But it turns out there's a lot of interest in that. So, yeah, I think it's wonderful.
I won't take you more of your time. I know it's valuable.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. This interview is really valuable for me, so thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Sandra. We should stay connected. I'm very excited for you. Yeah. I'm very proud of you for bringing this topic that's very taboo to France, and I think that's wonderful. And I think most people won't quite understand, and that's okay. But some people will, and that is who we want to talk to.
Yeah,
are the people who are open to the idea. So good for you.
Yeah, thank you. You're really inspiring me. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. We'll be in touch, okay, Sandra?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Take care. Bye.